Hello, the unspoken woman. Welcome to the channel. The moment you stop playing someone else's game, their power over you begins to disappear. There is a particular kind of person who can handle rejection, disagreement, competition, and even open opposition, but struggles with something far more unsettling, someone who simply refuses to participate in their psychological game. And that is where the Sigma female becomes a very different kind of problem. She doesn't necessarily defeat this person by being louder. She doesn't need to embarrass them, expose them, or launch some dramatic counterattack. In many cases, she does something much less satisfying to the other person, and far more effective. She stops giving them the reaction they were counting on. Here is the fascinating part. Psychologists have long recognized that social behavior is heavily shaped by reinforcement. When a particular behavior consistently produces attention, emotion, compliance, or engagement, people have a reason to repeat it. Remove the reward, and the behavior can lose its power. That sounds simple. But watch what happens when the person has built their entire personality around controlling the social atmosphere. Suddenly, their carefully timed comment doesn't work. Their subtle provocation gets nothing. Their attempt to create jealousy falls flat. Their mysterious silence isn't chaste. Their little social power move receives the emotional equivalent of a customer service response. Thank you for your feedback. And that is when things get interesting. Because the personality type Sigma females tend to clash with isn't necessarily the loudest person in the room. It is the person who needs other people to behave predictably in order to feel powerful. They need reactions. They need roles. They need access. They need people to care what they think. And most importantly, they need to believe they can still move you. A Sigma female can become incredibly difficult for that personality type because she may not even realize she is supposed to be playing the game. So throughout this video, we're going deeper than the usual Sigma females don't care what people think clichés. We're going to uncover the specific personality patterns that begin to malfunction when they encounter someone who cannot be easily pressured, categorized, baited, or socially managed. And some of these clashes are surprisingly subtle, because the most fascinating psychological battles aren't always the ones where somebody raises their voice. Sometimes, the real battle begins when one person realizes they can no longer control the other person's emotional temperature. Number 1. The social engineer who needs everyone to have a role. Some people don't simply meet others, they mentally organize them. Within minutes, they decide who is useful, who is impressive, who is insecure, who can be influenced, and who should stay in the background. They quietly build a social map and expect everyone to behave according to the role they've assigned. Then comes the Sigma female. Her biggest offense, from their perspective, is not rebellion. It's unpredictability. She doesn't automatically become the admirer, follower, rival, or approval seeker they expected. She can respect someone without worshipping them, disagree without becoming hostile, and walk away without needing to announce her departure. That makes her incredibly difficult to manage. The social engineer often depends on predictable reactions. Give someone praise, and they become warmer. Apply pressure, and they become defensive. Create competition, and they try harder. But when those buttons stop working, the entire strategy starts looking strangely obvious. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The Sigma female doesn't necessarily destroy this personality by defeating them socially. She destroys the system they use to control people. She refuses the assigned character, no performance, no desperate need to prove herself, no endless explanations. And eventually, the social engineer faces a frustrating realization. You cannot manipulate someone who refuses to audition for the role you wrote for them. Number 2. The person who uses confusion as a form of control. Some people don't control others by giving orders. They control them by keeping them confused. One day they're warm, the next they're distant. They say one thing, then quietly behave as if they said something completely different. When questioned, they change the subject, add a new detail, or somehow make you feel like you're the one misunderstanding everything. This tactic works because uncertainty makes people chase clarity. But the Sigma female can become a terrible match for this personality. She doesn't necessarily spend hours decoding mixed signals or turning every strange interaction into a mystery worthy of a detective series. When someone's behavior becomes consistently confusing, she may simply take the confusion as information. That's the part the manipulator doesn't expect. They may be waiting for her to ask, "What did I do?" or "Why are you acting differently?" Instead, she might quietly reduce her involvement. No dramatic confrontation, no emotional investigation, just less access. And suddenly, confusion stops being a weapon. The brutally honest part is that some people create confusion because clarity would remove their advantage. If their intentions were obvious, you could make a straightforward decision. Confusion keeps you engaged. A Sigma female who recognizes that pattern can break it with one simple response. She stops trying to understand what someone keeps deliberately making unclear. And nothing frustrates a confusion-based strategy more than someone who simply refuses to play detective. Number 3. The emotional accountant. Some people keep score in relationships without ever admitting they're keeping score. They remember every favor, every sacrifice, every time they showed up, every message they answered, and every inconvenience they tolerated. Then, somewhere down the road, they present the bill. The Sigma female can be extremely difficult for this personality because she may not accept the idea that kindness automatically creates debt. The emotional accountant might think, "After everything I did for you, how can you say no?" But the Sigma female may see it differently. If you helped me because you genuinely wanted to help, why should your kindness become a lifetime membership contract? That question destroys the logic behind the transaction. She can appreciate what someone has done without surrendering her freedom because of it. She can say thank you without saying, "You now own a piece of my decisions." And this is where things can get uncomfortable. The emotional accountant may increase the pressure, reminding her of old favors she thought were already settled. Suddenly, yesterday's kindness becomes today's weapon. A simple disagreement turns into an audit of the entire relationship. But she isn't necessarily interested in defending herself against every entry on the ledger. She understands something brutally simple. Gratitude is healthy, emotional debt is not. Once she recognizes that every favor comes with an invisible price tag, she stops accepting the transaction. And when there is no debt to collect, the emotional accountant has nothing left to threaten her with. Number 4. The identity borrower. Some people don't really build an identity from scratch. They collect pieces from everyone around them. A little style from one person, an opinion from another, a mannerism from someone else. Then suddenly they have a personality that looks impressive, but feels strangely familiar. The Sigma female can expose this without trying. She isn't necessarily difficult to imitate because she dresses differently or speaks in some mysterious way. She's difficult to imitate because her choices often come from personal reasoning rather than social copying. She may change her interests, abandon a trend, develop an unusual opinion, or completely switch direction when something no longer makes sense to her. That makes imitation exhausting. The identity borrower can copy what is visible, but they cannot easily copy the private reasons behind those choices. And that's where the game falls apart. Copy the clothes, but not the mindset. Copy the phrases, but not the convictions. Copy the lifestyle, but not the willingness to walk away from it when it stops serving a purpose. Eventually, imitation starts looking less like admiration and more like evidence. The brutally honest truth is that borrowed identity requires a source. If someone constantly needs another person to tell them what is interesting, valuable, fashionable, or impressive, They remain dependent on the very person they're trying to replicate. A Sigma female doesn't need to defeat that person. She simply keeps evolving, leaving the copy permanently chasing yesterday's version of her. Number 5. The person who needs to be the most interesting person in the room. Some people don't simply enjoy attention, they depend on it. They need their stories to be the funniest, their opinions to be the most impressive, and their presence to be noticed. When someone else becomes more interesting, they can suddenly become restless, competitive, or strangely dismissive. That is where the Sigma female becomes an uncomfortable opponent. She doesn't necessarily enter a room trying to win attention. In fact, she may be perfectly comfortable sitting quietly, observing conversations, and speaking only when she has something worth saying. She doesn't need to perform every 5 minutes just to remind everyone that she exists. And ironically, that lack of performance can attract attention by itself. The attention-dependent personality may respond by turning up the volume, more jokes, bigger stories, subtle interruptions, exaggerated achievements. But the Sigma female doesn't have to compete. She can simply remain composed. That's what makes the dynamic so frustrating. Competition requires 2 competitors. If someone tries to turn every conversation into a contest, and the other person doesn't recognize it as a contest, the entire performance becomes awkwardly one-sided. The brutally honest truth is that some people don't want to be admired as much as they want to feel more important than everyone else. A Sigma female who doesn't challenge them, flatter them, or compete with them can quietly expose that insecurity. She doesn't steal their spotlight. She simply proves they never owned it. Number 6. The social prosecutor. Some people don't have conversations, they build cases. They remember the awkward sentence you said 3 months ago, the mistake you made last year, the one time you didn't respond quickly enough, and every little detail that can later be pulled out when they need leverage. Their strength comes from keeping you permanently on trial. The Sigma female can ruin that strategy because she doesn't automatically step into the witness box. She may refuse to explain every decision, defend every preference, or argue over someone's carefully collected evidence, and that can be incredibly frustrating. The social prosecutor wants a reaction. They want you flustered, over-explaining yourself, correcting every accusation, and desperately proving that you're not the person they've described. But the more you defend yourself against every tiny accusation, the longer the trial continues. The Sigma female may eventually recognize the trap and stop participating altogether. She doesn't need to prove she's perfect. She understands that being misunderstood isn't automatically an emergency. That's the uncomfortable truth. Someone who constantly needs you to defend yourself may not actually be searching for the truth. They may be searching for control. Once she stops treating every accusation like a serious charge, the prosecutor loses the courtroom. No lengthy defense, no emotional closing argument, no 12-part explanation worthy of a Netflix documentary. Just distance, boundaries, and the refusal to keep answering questions that were never asked in good faith. Number 7. The personality that lives through reactions. Some people don't simply experience emotions, they measure their importance through the emotions they create in others. If people admire them, they feel powerful. If people become jealous, they feel significant. If someone gets angry, they know they've struck a nerve. Even negative attention can become a form of validation. That is why a Sigma female's calmness can be so frustrating to them. She doesn't always reward behavior with an emotional response. A provocative comment may receive a simple pause. A subtle insult may get ignored. A dramatic announcement may receive nothing more than a polite, "Okay." To someone who survives on reactions, that can feel like talking to a locked door. The temptation is then to escalate. The joke becomes sharper. The criticism becomes more personal. The drama gets louder. They keep testing different buttons, hoping to discover which one finally works. But here's the brutally honest part. When someone needs your emotional reaction to feel powerful, your reaction has become their fuel. The Sigma female doesn't need to win that contest. She can simply stop supplying the fuel. And that changes the entire dynamic. Her silence isn't necessarily weakness. Her calm isn't necessarily agreement. Sometimes it is simply emotional independence. The ability to decide that another person's behavior does not deserve control over her mood. For the reaction-driven personality, that is a nightmare, because eventually they face the one response they cannot manipulate: nothing. Number 8. The boundary negotiator who treats no as an opening bid. Some people hear no and don't hear a decision. They hear a challenge. They ask again. Then they add pressure. Then they offer a compromise you never requested. If that fails, they bring emotion into it: guilt, disappointment, silence, accusations, or the classic, "I was only trying to help." Their entire strategy depends on turning your boundary into a negotiation. This is where the Sigma female becomes a particularly difficult person to pressure. She may not feel obligated to produce a courtroom-quality explanation for every boundary she sets. If she says she doesn't want something, she doesn't necessarily believe the decision becomes more valid after a 20-minute speech. And that creates a serious problem for the boundary negotiator. There is nothing to negotiate when the answer isn't waiting for approval. They might ask, "But why?" she explains once. They ask again. She realizes the question isn't about understanding anymore. It's about finding a weakness in the answer. That's when the conversation can end. The brutally honest truth is that some people don't respect boundaries. They respect resistance they cannot overcome. They keep pushing because previous pushing worked with someone else. But when they meet someone who doesn't argue, bargain, or become emotionally exhausted, their usual tactics lose traction. The Sigma female doesn't need a bigger voice. She simply makes her no complete enough that it doesn't require permission. Number 9. The competitive mimic. Some people don't compete with you immediately. First, they study you. They notice what makes you different, what people compliment, what gets attention, what you're quietly good at, and what makes you difficult to ignore. Then, little by little, they start reproducing it. The clothes become similar. The phrases sound familiar. The interests suddenly overlap. Even the goals can start looking suspiciously alike. At first, it might seem flattering. Then it becomes strange. The problem for the competitive mimic is that a Sigma female's identity isn't necessarily built around the things that can be copied. Her choices may come from private preferences, personal experiences, curiosity, or simply deciding that something makes sense to her. So copying the surface doesn't reproduce the source. They can imitate the style, but not the reason behind it. They can copy the routine, but not the discipline that created it. They can repeat the words, but not the thinking that gave those words meaning. And that's where the competition becomes exhausting. Because the Sigma female may change direction without warning. She might abandon something she once loved, learn something completely new, or pursue a path nobody expected. Now the mimic has a problem. What exactly are they supposed to copy? The brutally honest truth is that imitation requires someone else to follow. A genuinely independent person keeps moving, and eventually the mimic realizes they aren't competing with her anymore. They're chasing her previous version while she's already somewhere else. Number 10. The social debt collector. Some people treat kindness like a contract. They help you once, remember it forever, and quietly store it away for the perfect moment. Then, when you make a decision they don't like, the bill arrives. "After everything I've done for you." That sentence can turn a favor into a weapon. The Sigma female is difficult for this personality because she can appreciate genuine help without allowing it to purchase control over her future. She can say thank you sincerely and still say no afterward. That distinction is powerful. A social debt collector often expects favors to create obedience. They may believe that because they supported you during one difficult moment, you now owe them access, loyalty, agreement, attention, or even forgiveness. But gratitude and submission are not the same thing. The Sigma female may recognize that difference faster than the person expects. She doesn't necessarily reject kindness. She rejects the hidden invoice attached to it. And when the debt collector realizes that their biggest bargaining chip has expired, the conversation can become uncomfortable. They can mention the old favor again. She can still say no. They can remind her how much they sacrificed. She can still make her own decision. They can become offended that their kindness didn't buy permanent influence. That's the brutal truth. A favor stops being a favor when it is repeatedly used as leverage. Real generosity doesn't need to keep sending reminders. And once the Sigma female recognizes that someone is collecting debts instead of building relationships, she becomes very careful about what she accepts from them. Number 11. The status interpreter. Some people walk into every room carrying an invisible scoreboard. They notice who gets greeted first, who receives the most attention, who sits closest to the important people, who gets invited, who gets ignored, and whose opinion suddenly makes everyone quiet. To them, almost every interaction contains a ranking. The Sigma female can completely disrupt that way of thinking because she may not recognize the hierarchy they're desperately trying to establish. She can speak to the receptionist with the same basic respect she gives the executive. She can listen to someone with no impressive title and still value what they say. She can sit alone without treating it as social failure. That creates a problem for the status interpreter. They may expect her to chase proximity to influential people, compete for recognition, or change her behavior around someone considered important. But if she doesn't adjust, their ranking system starts producing useless information. And here's the funny part. They may become more interested in her precisely because she isn't impressed by the scoreboard. The brutally honest truth is that status only has as much psychological power as people give it. Some people spend enormous energy climbing social ladders that exist mostly inside their own heads. A Sigma female who doesn't automatically worship the ladder can make the whole performance look strangely unnecessary. She isn't trying to be above anyone. She simply refuses to measure her worth using someone else's ranking system. Number 12. The person who uses access as a reward. Some people turn access into currency. Their attention, invitations, information, affection, and even simple replies become things you must supposedly earn by behaving exactly the way they expect. Stay agreeable, and the door opens. Question them, and suddenly the door closes. They may call it standards, but sometimes it is simply control dressed in better clothing. The Sigma female can be difficult for this personality because exclusion doesn't automatically scare her. If someone withdraws access to punish her, she may not scramble to get back inside. She may simply continue with her life, and that is where the strategy becomes useless. The person expects distance to create anxiety. Instead, they discover that the Sigma female can create her own plans, relationships, opportunities, and routines without begging for an invitation. That can be deeply frustrating. They may reopen the door expecting gratitude. She may walk through only if the relationship actually makes sense, not because she was relieved to be allowed back. The brutally honest truth is that access is only powerful when someone fears losing it. If you use your presence as a weapon against someone who doesn't depend on your presence, you've basically brought a water pistol to a rainstorm. The Sigma female doesn't necessarily reject people simply to prove independence. She simply doesn't believe belonging should require surrendering her judgment. And once she realizes someone uses access to control behavior, she stops chasing the door. She starts asking whether she even wants to enter. At the end of the day, the personality type a Sigma female tends to destroy isn't necessarily the loudest, most aggressive, or most intimidating person in the room. It is the person who depends on control without admitting they need control. The social engineer needs everyone to play a role. The confusion maker needs you searching for answers. The emotional accountant needs you feeling indebted. The mimic needs someone worth copying. The attention seeker needs an audience. The social prosecutor needs you defending yourself. The reaction-driven personality needs your emotions. The boundary negotiator needs your no to become a maybe. The status interpreter needs you to respect the hierarchy. And the person who uses access as a reward needs you to fear being excluded. But there is a common thread running through all of them. They become far less powerful when you stop giving them the thing their strategy depends on. Your emotional dependence. That's the deeper lesson behind the Sigma female archetype. Her strength isn't that she can out-manipulate everyone. It isn't that she never cares, never needs anyone, or is somehow immune to human emotion. That would be another cliché. Her real advantage is knowing when participation has become more expensive than walking away. She doesn't need to win every argument. She doesn't need to expose every fake person. She doesn't need to prove that she is smarter. Sometimes the most powerful decision is simply refusing to keep playing a game that was designed to drain her. And that's what makes her so difficult for controlling personalities to understand. You cannot easily control someone who doesn't need your approval. You cannot easily pressure someone who can tolerate your disappointment. You cannot easily manipulate someone who is willing to leave the table. And you certainly cannot keep your power over someone who has stopped measuring their worth by your reaction to them. So if any of these personalities reminded you of someone you've encountered, take the lesson, not the drama. Recognize the pattern, protect your boundaries, and most importantly, don't become the very type of person you're trying to escape. If you enjoyed this video and want more thought-provoking content like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't defeating someone. It's becoming someone they can no longer control.